In this module, we're going to talk about technology adoption. Now, when new technologies enter the marketplace, it's not like we wake up one morning and no matter how good they are, they don't suddenly appear everywhere. As you'll see in a minute, things that you consider to be completely ubiquitous today, like the telephone and the television and the cell phone and the internet, aren't everywhere. There's always places that it doesn't exist. The question here is, how do these technologies enter the market, and are there things that we can learn from that about how we position these things so that they have the greatest impact? Because that's really what this is all about in the first place. So when we think about how new products penetrate a market, we need to start here. The Bass diffusion model, developed in 1969, describes how new products get adopted as the interaction between existing users and potential users. Now, this is important because we don't live in a vacuum. We are influenced through the media, through advertising, through our friends. This is how we find out what good products are and what we ought to use. Think about how you decide what apps you have on your iPad or your Android tablet or your cell phone. I'll bet everybody has at least one app that they got because a friend told them it was cool or it was useful. We all do this. And so Bass tried to model this, among other things. So he addresses this thing called the network effect, which amplifies adoption because it simplifies this interaction. It's used extensively in product and technology forecasting. So folks who are investing in new companies and new technologies use the Bass diffusion model. Now, here are the charts that describe it. On the left, you see adopters over time on the horizontal, and on the vertical are the number of adopters. And you'll see it follows, we call this an S-curve, because as you can see on the far left, it does start off a little slow, then it catches up real fast, and then it flattens off to an asymptote up on the top. Now, what's interesting is the one on the right. Notice that new adopters, this is the pace at which new people are adopting this technology, starts off kind of slow, picks up speed, reaches some summit, and then it drops off very quickly on the back side because you're saturating the market. And look at the imitators. These are people who are following the new adopters. Notice it has the same shaped curve, but it's time shifted to the right. Now, you've seen this curve before. This is the chart that talks about the displacement of the horse-drawn carriage with the automobile. I already talked about an S-curve. You'll notice that look at the adoption curve of the automobile. It looks like an S-curve, very much similar to what we just saw in the last chart. You get increasing returns near maturity and then decreasing returns up at where it asymptotes. Now, it's approximated by this equation, which we won't get into. But here's the most important part of this whole section. We're going to show you a graph in a minute that shows you this. It has these phases. It has a group called innovators. It has a group called early adopters. And it has more of an event. It's not a group. It's an event called the chasm that has to be crossed before you can get to early majority, late majority, and laggards. Now, one last thing we'll get into here is adoption and co-adoption, where this is the case where adoption of one innovation or one product is actually connected to another. And you remember talking about earlier where we talked about the Wintel dynasty, where Windows, Microsoft Windows, and Intel microprocessors co-evolved. So that was a case of co-adoption. But there are a lot of cases like this. What you're looking at in this graph is a chart of electric power in manufacturing, which preceded electric power in city homes. And you think electric power was adopted fast. Look at what happened with web access in the home, where we're looking at potentially coming close to 100% adoption in the very near future. It's not a new phenomenon, and the rates can vary wildly on this, but it's just a matter of where an innovation, the adoption of one innovation actually influences the adoption of another. Now, this is a little bit of an eye chart, so I'll make the graphic available so you can look at it offline. But this is just looking at the consumption of a variety of things that you're all familiar with. So if you look on the left, moving from the left to the right, look at the adoption of the telephone. And it's not as fast as you think it was. Look at the automobile. Look at electricity. Look at the stove. The stove actually came at about the same rate as the telephone. A little bit slower, but very similar in shape. The refrigerator was faster. So it's not a matter of how important you think the technology is today. It's a matter of what was it viewed like at that time. How critical was it, necessary was it in people's lives that they would rush out and buy it. So some of these things will surprise you. You'll see clothes washer, clothes dryer, the color TV, very quick. Air conditioning, very quick. The microwave oven, very quick. The computer was fairly quick. The cell phone, extraordinarily quick, and internet was very fast, right? But you get other things that are a little slower, a little bit slower. The VCR actually had a faster adoption curve than the computer. If you think about it, it actually makes sense. Computers are complicated. VCRs aren't. Putting aside all the jokes about the flashing 12 o'clock, people were scared by computers, and they were less scared by VCRs. So this is just a variety of things, and you look at all of these things can be modeled, even though you see these dips and things. Like, for example, look at the clothes washer. Look at the shape of the clothes washers right in the middle of the curve. Look at the dip it took as it was increasing in popularity through the 1930s and then actually decreased through the 40s, through the mid-40s, before it picked up on the other side. Well, what happened right in the middle of that era? That was World War II. People didn't have money. They didn't buy clothes washers. So it didn't pick up until the other side. So sometimes there can be a world event that actually causes some of these shapes to not quite conform the way you think they should. But by and large, the Bass equation can model all of these. Now, this is the chart I was talking about building up to here. Now notice we're talking about market share on one side and the different phases of adoption across the horizontal. Now, what you get here is, notice how, starting from the far left, moving towards the right, are innovators. First of all, that's a fairly small group. These are the hobbyists. These are people who don't really care about how good a technology is. Remember the discussion on disruptive technology. Remember the lower dotted line where below it you really don't have a market? These guys don't care. They'll buy it anywhere below that line. They'll buy it just because it's cool. They'll buy an Apple I computer that doesn't even have a chassis, that you actually have to build your own chassis because they just think it's interesting. That's what an innovator is. It's a small group, but they're important because they provide you enough capital early on in your innovation cycle that you can increase the product quality. Then you move to early adopters. There's more of these. Now it's starting to have some utility. It's still a problematic group because they're earlier than the early majority and late majority, which is the mainstream of the marketplace. So this is the case where people still are willing to try things out. They want to be the first one with the cool stuff. There's no question about it. So they're very early. But again, look at the number. There's about 13.5% of them. So it's not that this is a huge group. And the next thing you see is this. This is where the chasm lives, right between early adopters and early majority. What's the point here? What is the chasm? The chasm, it's called this because so many companies have fallen into it. You have an innovation. You put a product into the marketplace. Innovators and early adopters are telling you that you got something really hot and cool. And you're looking at the shape of the curve of how your market share is growing, and you assume it's going to continue. And what you don't realize is that the characteristics of the market for early majority, which is where you're really going to solidify your place in the marketplace, and early adopters are completely different. They almost have nothing in common with each other. Early majority are very pragmatic people. Yes, they're early. They're willing to be earlier than later. They're trying to use technology to gain a competitive advantage on their competitors, but they kind of need for this thing to be proven. So Jeffrey Moore talks about the chasm as a barrier to be crossed, the fact that you have to think very differently. This is the point where lots of CEOs that started their companies in the innovator and early adopter phase lose their job because it's a completely different leadership skill set that you need to take your company into what's called the tornado on the other side of the chasm than you had before the chasm. Before the Chasm is sort of a fun lifestyle company. It's cool. You're doing cool things. You certainly aren't public. You're building technology for you, not for your customers yet. You cross the Chasm, you're building things to make money. And you've got to turn a profit. And it's a completely different way of thinking about your company. So when you get into the early majority, look at early and late majority, 34%, 34%. This is the fat part of the bell curve. The late majority are the folks that really need the product to be proven. They're going to wait until that's really a solid product before they jump on it. These are the folks that worry about, are you going to be around to support me? Am I going to be left with legacy systems? Things like that. That's what the legacy late majority usually thinks about. Early majority is a little less concerned about that. And then, of course, this finishes up with a group called laggards. And the best thing to say about laggards is don't worry about them. There are people in the United States that don't own a phone. There are people in the United States that won't own a television, that won't own a cell phone. They just don't want it. They found a way to live without it. They like their life without it. Don't kill yourself trying to get them. Plus, it's a small group. It's 16%. So any laggards that eventually come to your technology, great. If they don't, you can build many successful companies that have been built without worrying about the laggards. Now we're looking at the situation where new products aren't entirely new products. They're generational. They're building off of the old product. So the example we're giving here is Microsoft Windows. But look at how Microsoft's operating system history has been influenced by outside innovations. So you get the first burst of application software. You get another burst at the IBM Compatible. You get another burst with the invention of the hard drive. You get another burst at 32 bits. Another when Windows is added on top of DOS. Look at the big burst when multimedia comes out. These are all people who are now saying, now I got to have it. Didn't need it before, now I got to have it. And look at what happens with the Internet. The Internet made it so that everybody's mom and dad wanted to have a machine that they would have never wanted before, but now they have to have one. So these outside influences are what drive generational sales. Now, this is interesting when you look at hardware versioning. So this is how often people are upgrading. And this gets to the point that we were making back in the Disruptive Technology module, where the PC market is now above the upper bound of acceptability in the marketplace, meaning that they're looking for reasons to make you want to upgrade, and they're having a harder and harder time getting you to do it. Now, there was a time, you think back, IBM 286 came out, everybody bought one. They bought the 386 came out, everybody bought one. The 486, and then the Pentium, everybody bought one. So that was a cycle when it was very clear. More power meant I can do more things faster. I want to upgrade. We're past that. New operating systems are coming out, new chipsets are coming out, and the customers are looking at it saying, why do I want to do that? And in fact, we're seeing for the first time a shift in the metrics of why people are buying away from the traditional performance characteristics of power and speed towards something else like power consumption, saving my battery life. I want it for my mobile device, things like that. So the rules are changing as we move along. So this is just a quick snapshot about technology adoption. Very quick, because the two references I'm giving you here, if you're really interested in this topic, the Bible is Rogers' The Fusion of Innovations, the most comprehensive book on innovation and how it approaches a market that's ever been written. Geoffrey Moore, much more recently, 2006, talks about crossing the chasm. He actually had a follow-on called In the Tornado, which I mentioned. The tornado refers to that moment when you have successfully crossed the chasm and you have a company that's actually done the right things to cross the chasm, but isn't built for the huge market that follows the other side. And so you can imagine a small company that's tightly managing costs now looking at huge demand for their product, and they have no idea how to manufacture it and deliver it. That's the tornado. So these are excellent books, and they're very short. They're very easy to read. And if you're interested in this topic, I highly recommend them.